Welcome to the Near Memo, a weekly conversation about search, social, and commerce. What happened, why it matters, and the implications for local. Hello again, everybody. Welcome to the Near Memo with today Mike Blumenthal and me, Greg Sterling. David Mim is out, and this is episode 121, remarkably, amazingly, in which we talk about local search, social, commerce, antitrust, privacy, AI, what we had for breakfast, whatever else is top of mind, which makes this a beautiful experience for everyone involved, I'm sure. It's not entirely true that we're just being totally extemporaneous and improvising, but it's largely the case. We do a little tiny hint of planning here at the margins. Okay,
we both do a lot of thinking during the week. That counts for something.
All right, I'm quite neurotic, and so I'm always thinking about different things, including technology. So actually, I'm a lot less neurotic than I used to be. So the first item.
I'm glad to hear that, Greg, and yes. I'm sure our listeners are too.
They are glad, and there are probably some people that have known me for 20 years, and they can probably attest to that. So. The first item here is there's a lot of stuff that we could talk about, but the thing that I wanted to sort of bring up is an interesting quarterly survey that Jungle Scout does on basically e-commerce and spending, consumer spending. And there are a lot of things in the report. I wrote about it, as I said, on Wednesday. The thing that was most striking to me was a year-over-year change in terms of where people started their product search process. So this has always been a topic of discussion. 70%, 50%, 60% of people start their product search on Amazon. And this has been a real challenge to Google, which for years now has been the number 2 place, certainly getting lots and lots of product search traffic and lots of retail related ad revenue, but they have not been the number 1, the starting place for product search. And they want to be able to say that to their advertisers. And so they've invested enormous amounts of time, energy, money into supplement, just enhancing, product ads, shopping ads,
integrating with e-commerce, integrating with local businesses, buying
exactly.
Pointy,
the merchant center.
Center.
All the effort to bring offline inventory online. I mean, all of which, is valuable to the consumer, certainly. But the thing that showed up in this Jungle Scout report was a decline in the usage of Amazon and Google. I mean, it says search engine, but it's Google, as the starting point for product search. This does not talk about, if people are using multiple sites or sources, where Amazon and Google fall in the hierarchy. They are the number 1 and number 2 places as a starting point. But Amazon lost 4 points year over year from Q2 2022 to Q2 2023, from 61% of people who start their product searches on Amazon to 57% of people. And Google, interestingly, went from 49%, which is kind of strange because that's more than 100%. But what it represents is people using both tools, I guess, 49% to 42%. So a 7-point decline.
Over what time frame?
1 year over year, Q2 last year to Q2 this year. And correspondingly, Walmart saw some gains, but social media collectively saw 14 points of growth. YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, and I think Pinterest. Pinterest was flat, but TikTok grew 6 points. It was the one that gained the most, which makes sense because TikTok has become more popular, and Instagram grew 3 points. Facebook also grew a couple of points, and YouTube grew 3 points. So what this represents to me, and we'll see if it holds, we'll see next quarter what happens and subsequent quarters. What this represents to me is frustration or dissatisfaction with Amazon and Google, at least at the margins, and then a shift to social media as a way, as an alternative way to get information about products, which goes into the credibility of, product information, product reviews, the user experience that people are having on Google and Amazon. We'll be talking about reviews in your section, Mike, but what we see consistently in the survey data now is increasing awareness of review fraud, and certain amount of skepticism about that, which we can debate the accuracy of those findings. But this seems to be some sort of behavioral proof that people are not getting what they need from Amazon and Google to the same degree that they were, and so they're looking outside of those places for product inspiration, information that is sort of similar, evaluation, product evaluations or recommendations. And
It may
I just
not
find it,
reflect dissatisfaction with Amazon and Google. It may reflect satisfaction with wherever they're hanging out.
with
If they're hanging out
yes,
on
with
YouTube, or they're
TikTok,
hanging
for
out on
example. Yeah.
TikTok, it may be,
Well,
well, as long as I'm here, I might as well look, right? Kind of attitude.
it's interesting because, I mean, the real answer is that all of these things are being used. It's an all of the above proposition, because people don't simply use Google, nor do they simply use Amazon, nor do they simply use YouTube. Is that they look at all these places and try and get a consensus view, or try and get more information to make their own decision. But it's not, it's much less efficient to use something like TikTok than it is to use Google or Amazon as a product search engine. I mean, TikTok will give you individual opinions of particular products, and sometimes that can be very, very helpful depending on the video. But it's much less efficient if you're looking to figure out what kind of pet snacks to buy, or where's the best price to get the particular pet snack, which is something that I have to buy fairly shortly, in short order, for my dog. Going to Amazon, going to Google is much more efficient than it is to go to TikTok and try and look up the same product and see whether a single individual liked it. So I see some dissatisfaction and frustration playing out in the people turning to social media as an alternative way to get information. Um,
It would be interesting. We've been doing a lot of consumer research and tracking, actually watching consumers work on Google. It would be interesting for us to assign the problem of product acquisition and watching how users go about making that decision. Um, so,
Right. I mean, they're obviously looking at prices. They're looking at reviews. They're looking at images. I mean, there was Brody Clark had a very interesting post case study about how Foot Locker got more of its thumbnails into Google, and this is kind of an aside. Uh, Having more pictures improve traffic, and I'm conjecturing clicks and conversions, because that's helpful. That's what people want to see. So the more information that's out there, sort of the better for people. But it's become uh, quite burdensome in many cases, because there is so much information to make certain kinds of product choices or certain kinds of service business choices. But I just found it interesting that there seems to be some shifting towards social, and maybe away from Google and Amazon at the margins as a kind of a primary resource, which brings up,
and that's despite
yeah,
Google's massive investment in product search and local
huge.
product search, huge investment. Right.
Well, and I think Google needs to keep going with local product inventory. I mean, I think that's a critical thing if it's really going to compete with Amazon, or if it's going to better compete with Amazon. Because one of the reasons why people go to Amazon is because they don't know where to get a product, or because they assume that Amazon will have the product, and if local inventory is available, that represents some sort of alternative that people are lazy. People will do the path of least resistance, and in many cases that's Amazon. And if you give them an alternative, chances are they'll use that. But I wanted to make one other point and a half. Yesterday, Google released earnings. They did very well. Their stock went up. I don't know where it is today. The ad spending seems to be returning. They're a beneficiary. One of the reasons that they're a beneficiary of sort of a macro trend toward increased ad spending is because they're a search monopoly. They're not a monopoly on the display side, and their network underperformed. But YouTube and search did better than expected, because in those areas, even though you could argue that TikTok is encroaching on YouTube. In those areas, they have a virtual or quasi monopoly. And what we talked about before we got started today is how increasingly, whether it's Google, whether it's Amazon, whether it's Twitter, there are other sites probably that fall into this category. Increasingly, we're confronted with these monopolies or quasi monopolies or de facto dominant sites that people are profoundly ambivalent about, but they have to use in their minds because there isn't really an alternative. Twitter still is sort of in that category. Google certainly in that category. Amazon in that category. Um, you know, prime growth has plateaued in the United States, and there's some indication that it's even in decline. And I think that we're in a situation where a lot of the tools that we use, a lot of the sites that we use, a lot of the things that we rely upon, we have this very ambivalent relationship about, and we don't feel that there are a lot of alternatives. Now, on the B2B side, there's a lot of competition, a lot of alternatives, but it's interesting that we're here in this place right now, and there's pent up demand for alternatives, but nobody is breaking through either with some search alternative. There was a whole article on The Verge about Neva, how they couldn't break through. Um, there's nothing really to challenge Amazon. Walmart, maybe some of the big boxes, but not really. And Twitter so far, Twitter is the most vulnerable, but still it's hanging on because nobody has broken through with a consensus alternative. So that was sort of a rambling conclusion to that discussion. So now let's move on to an interesting incident that happened. I don't know if it happened a week ago or if it's not this week. It must have been last week, where somebody, a hijacker, literally and figuratively, was able to replace American Airlines. I believe it was American Airlines customer service number with a scam number and try to rip off air passengers who were trying to call American Airlines and reschedule flights or whatever. So give us more information on that, Mike.
Well, turned out that not only American Airlines, but a number of other airlines, I think Delta and Southwest, their customer service numbers on Google had been modified and redirected to, it sounded like a foreign phone answering service.
Some fraudster.
Where they attempted to charge for upgrade, explain that they were charging, they were going to upgrade the person, and they got their credit card number and they charged them. So it was a credit card fraud. And as is typical with these hijacks on Google, there's these big warnings that go out in the press, and it was in all the major news media. In fact, I got called at least twice about this story. And the typical storyline is, travelers beware. Google's been criminals are afoot, and Google's been hijacked. And Google, what always fascinates me about these stories is these business hijackings have been occurring regularly since at least 2008, when I think initially it was a payday loan companies got hijacked, and then subsequently in 2008, florists got hijacked. In fact, I even personally hijacked Microsoft's headquarters in 2008 and turned it into an escort service just to demonstrate how easy this was.
Yeah.
And it has happened regularly. Hotels in India last year, hotels in the United States in 2014, and a number of other industries, wherever there is a significant profit. And the reason it happens and Google always, every time it happens, Google has the same answer, and the same answer to fake business locations, the same answer to fake reviews. Their answer is scammers are smart. We fix this problem. It's a constant battle. And I would ask, if it's a constant battle, why does it take 16 or 18 years to
Why
fix
don't you
this
learn
problem?
from it? Yeah.
Exactly. And what I realized about halfway through that 16-year period is that Google's local model is to crowdsource data because it is cheap. And they have the hubris to believe that their machine learning can suss out truth from false and only approve the edits from this great crowdsource that have enough signal to strength. And so as part of their business model of cheap data acquisition. They leave this avenue open where people can come in and edit any business listing. And if
But
there's enough
what
signal,
about
go
wasn't
ahead.
wasn't the profile verified though?
It doesn't, right. So verification is locks your data down, but not completely, and only to some extent. And if Google is getting enough signals, for example, if your business is closed, or enough signals that your phone number has changed, they do not have enough faith in the verification process to give complete.
Ironically, it's their own process.
Well, they don't have enough faith in the quality of the data. They, because businesses don't update it, they will accept community edits after, with some vetting. And this has been this case forever. And it's cheap, it's expeditious, 95% of the time, it's accurate. But year after year, we see these instances that it isn't always accurate. And
Well,
so,
what's kind of interesting, as you point out, is that this has been going on in different contexts with them for a long time, and they see it as a kind of, they see the brand hit that they take in the press and the media as a kind of cost of doing business, right? Rather than try and
they see it as a signal
prophylactically.
to respond. They know the problem exists. They never
Oh
respond
yeah, yeah,
publicly to the
yeah. They
problem
wait. They
until
wait
it
for
gets
the
to a certain, right. They wait for
right.
the
So they
noise.
fix it after the fact, rather than doing what people would call pretentiously prophylaxis, so preventative activity to minimize the instances of fraud. They're and they're relatively, I guess, at this level of sort of visibility, infrequent, but they see it as a cost of doing business. We're going to take the brand hit. We're going to take the negative PR because it's just much cheaper for us to do it this way than to invest the resources up front to prevent this kind of thing. And I would argue. I mean, you're probably not finished. I don't let me before I
Yeah,
go
I'm,
off
I'm
on a
basically
rant.
finished. Go ahead. Go.
Well, but I mean,
Rant
I would
away, my
argue,
friend.
yeah, I would argue. I haven't even had any coffee. I would argue that that over time, the trust that Google has. I mean, they're consistently one or two in all these brand rankings, brand value, brand trust, brand perception. They rank consistently pretty high, but over time, the trust is going away for them. It's leaking out. With each of these things, people become more cynical, more wary. Now we're in sort of a little bit of an echo chamber of SEOs and internet marketing types who are not representative of the public at large. But I think this is sort of what I was saying a few minutes ago, is that these services that we used to really admire, trust, rely upon, uh, feel good about using, feel excited about using, have lost a lot of that value for us. And now it's just this like, okay, we use Google, but we can't really trust what it says. It's sort of like the stuff that's going on with SGE right now. You see the results coming up, and there are no citations. I'm doing a lot of I'm putting together presentations for a conference, and so I'm doing a bunch of research that is very data intensive. And so these SGE results are coming up, and it's like 47%, 22%, 36%, and I just have to totally disregard them because there's no support for them. But back to this point about quality. I mean, Google's rhetoric is all about quality assurance, helpful content, et cetera, et cetera. But its actions don't necessarily match that.
So I would point out several things. One is it has this practice, which is standard practice at Google, to accept this as a cost of doing business. Firstly, shifts the real cost of this onto society and onto the other businesses, right? So the biggest question here is whether, as a society, we should accept business practices that essentially externalize what should be internalized costs, externalize it to the public. That's question one. Question two, though, is that clearly, even though people maybe no longer look at Google as this miraculous, cool startup, they clearly are still doing a lot of searches, and advertisers are spending a lot of
because
money.
there's nothing because
And
there's
Google
no
has
real
built
alternative.
a huge business using this same model. In other words, this model of only fix it after they've been caught, say, blame the spammers and let the problem die away, come back in 6 months. This model has worked for Google for 20 some years, right? We're now 24 years into Google or whatever. And so if it succeeds from their point of view, why should they stop? And
Sure.
I know your contention is that it's sort of death by a thousand cuts.
Eventually, if there is an alternative, people will embrace the alternative. The problem is there isn't a viable alternative. I mean, you could say Bing, you can say, whatever, DuckDuckGo. You can point to these other alternatives, but at scale, there really isn't another alternative. And as long as there isn't true competition for Google, Google has no incentive to do anything different, despite the rhetoric. We as a society have decided. I mean, we're in a society where regulation is disfavored for the most part.
And a good example of that is that user-generated content, i.e., these changed phone numbers, and the changing of the phone number is Google. Google is totally isolated from a federal legal point of view under Section
230
for any responsibility for those numbers having changed, even though they have built a system that accepts those changes and assesses them and vets them.
Well, the entire culture of the internet, at least the so-called Web 2.0 period of years, was about crowdsourcing. Essentially, it's about shifting effort, for better or for worse, onto your audience, getting them to do a lot of the content creation, heavy lifting, whatever it is. You operate with a relatively modest team, and you leverage the community to create value for you, and then you go public or sell to somebody, and a small number of people who have invested in your entity reap the benefits, right? I mean, that's the right system that exists, and those are the incentives in the system. Yet these sites, which were created really for the benefit of investors and for a small number of individuals who were the founding executives, have become really critical to the functioning of consumers and businesses. Millions of consumers, millions of businesses depend on this private infrastructure now for their survival. And
it's a house of cards.
Right. I mean, people talk about that in terms of code, the code basis of a lot of these companies. But right. So let's shift now.
That's a good transition to reviews.
Yes,
absolutely.
Yes, let's talk about an interesting kind of incident that happened on Twitter, I guess. Yes. That a lot of people didn't notice. I linked to it, but I didn't highlight it in the newsletter on Wednesday.
So
what was it?
A woman by the name of Alex Friedman from Austin, Texas, tweeted. She's a blue check at Twitter. I don't know, what is a tweet still called a tweet?
It's not. We have to use the correct nomenclature. I don't know. It's an X.
It still says tweet in my window. So Alex Friedman tweeted, I'll read to you. My server today told me that she gets $15 gift card for groceries and diapers for every positive review she receives on Yelp. Would be a real shame if people started leaving positive reviews for Christina, who works at De Nata Cantina, excuse me, in Austin. And then a little bit later, she noted that she counted and Christina already has 15 plus new reviews. I'm crying. I love you all. I hope she goes to work tomorrow and is so surprised, and I hope you have the best day ever. And
somebody at Yelp saw that.
Somebody at Yelp saw it, and Luther Lowe, Yelp's public presence and policy person in Washington, tweeted that soliciting reviews, especially from people who haven't experienced business, is ultimately an attempt to deceive consumers. The business now has an alert on its Yelp listing giving some context that there was unusual activity alert. So I just find this very fascinating. One that
so let's explain what the unusual activity alert is for few people that may not.
It's a big exclamation point, and
it's a big scarlet letter warning sign
that the business received increased public attention, which often means people come to this page to post their views on the news. We don't take a stand one way or another, but we're going to stop all reviews going through. So at this point,
it's sort of neutral, but ultimately maybe negative.
it certainly impacts the business in the sense that who knows why or what, but people coming to it can't leave a review at Yelp. So it's several things. One, the hypocrisy of the Yelp statement that soliciting reviews is ultimately an attempt to deceive consumers is self-interested, holier than thou, horse pucky. I mean, it just isn't true. It isn't true if you look at it from a research point of view. It isn't true how businesses interact with consumers. The fact that this business, Donata Cantina, incentivizes their staff to remind customers to leave reviews is totally appropriate. Been going on for decades, hundreds of years, since the dawn of capitalism, I do believe, maybe before that, is a way of spreading the word. So that's interesting to me that Yelp is like so righteous, self-righteous about this. The other
they've
side of
always
it,
they've always
they've always
taken the
been.
they've always taken the position that incentivized reviews are compromised and should not be
They're
allowed.
taking the position that soliciting reviews, in other
Right,
words, what the server
which is
did,
a slightly different point. So asking for
right,
review versus offering a reward for review.
is ultimately an attempt to deceive consumers, which is just it only serves Yelp. It serves that statement serves no one else, and it's just very bizarre. Now, by the same token, Alex's behavior I find to be sort of
The the
virtue
person the person
who,
promoting the
promoting the idea that you should leave
program.
a review for Christina so she gets $15 from her business because that's how the business is incentivizing her to mention reviews to clients, that people should leave it. And apparently, I don't know, people did leave reviews at Google and Yelp, a number of them, and Alex is just so happy she's crying for Christina, so now Christina can buy diapers. I mean, to me, that is armchair social activity, social action. It is not real social action. If they really were concerned with Christina, they would fight for equitable pay for service for restaurant workers instead of tweeting out and then virtue signaling about how it's so important that Christina's making a living, or criticizing Yelp for living in a glass house, which they do, but not for this reason. So it just sort of reflects how society has taken reviews and is using them to different ends to satisfy some internal need to look good, and Yelp is using them to lecture people when neither seem to be true to me or appropriate ways of approaching this.
Well, I think that incentivizing reviews with monetary payments or some sort of quid pro quo is problematic. It doesn't always
Absolutely, totally
compromise
problematic.
the review, but it is problematic and can compromise the review.
It's problematic because it generally creates higher review scores incentives than not. And since most consumers, at least in our research that we're doing, seem to only look at the rating and not dig into the review to notice that a given review is incentivized, it ends up skewing perceptions. And so direct incentives of reviews, totally inappropriate. But this was not a
Soliciting is
direct
different.
incentive. That's right.
Soliciting is
The
different.
business wanted the employee to remember to ask for a review, to mention a review, and the employee chose to mention that she was incentivized to do so.
Well, from
Again, she's
from a
soliciting reviews, but she's not incentivizing reviews.
right. Well, so right. She's not paying people to write reviews, but
Correct.
she's getting some kickback if reviews mention her. Now,
A spiff is what it's called.
yes, spiff. I would almost use that term. Um, one of the ways to look at this, which is not the way we're talking about it, is that the business is doing a smart thing by enlisting their employees. I mean, we could say anything that we could have a cynical point of view and say, well, that business owner wants to look good, even though they should be paying more their employees more or whatever. But just putting that point aside, the idea that they're trying to enlist their employees to advocate for the business is a
Makes
smart
sense.
is a smart approach, right?
Yes.
Your employees are your best salespeople. Whoever they are your best salespeople. Satisfied employees, happy employees are going to sell your business more effectively. So they're saying, here, hey, if you can remind customers to do a review, we'll give you this small reward, and if, there's a certain logic and a certain kind of smart uh, strategy there. Now,
And there is even a strategy around incentivizing customers to give you a review, paying the $15 directly to them or whatever. And it's not illegal to do so. It's against Google's terms of service. It's against Yelp's terms of service. But the FTC says it's totally legitimate
If you
behavior,
disclose
which as long as it is disclosed as prominently as the review and in the same media as the review. So if the review is video, it has to be disclosed in the video. If the review
Right.
is written, it has to be disclosed. Now, I disagree with the FTC. I believe that since people only look at the ratings and since incentives skew reviews more positive as opposed to just soliciting, which tends to skew reviews more honestly, I believe that incentives of any form on consumer reviews shouldn't be allowed. I think they should be allowed in the context of testimonials or in endorsements, but not with consumer reviews. And I think
Well,
the FTC has made an error in that.
so in this particular context, you would not disqualify the business from giving the employee, the server, an incentive to solicit the review. That would not run afoul of your policy.
I think it's totally rational behavior on the part of the business and the part of the employee. And the employees learn, as you point out, representing the business and has every right, regardless of what Yelp
Right.
says,
The
to
challenge
solicit the review.
the challenge becomes
It's a
when,
subtle distinction. It's a nuanced
yeah.
sort of
So the
understanding.
challenge happens when you get the intervention of a, whatever review whisperer, review influencer. This woman, Alex, it's a woman, right? Alex
Yes, it's a
Friedman.
yeah.
Yeah. When you get some third party who comes in and says, "Hey, everybody, you need to write a bunch of reviews for this particular waitress because she's going to get a benefit for that." That's when the problem happens. In
That's
the
when the
absence
problem happens.
in the absence of that, maybe everything would have been fine. But beyond exposing it to Yelp, the problem is that you get a lot of people who just want to do, what they perceive to be a good deed, help out this woman because they feel empathy for her, and they've never been to the business, and so that's where the problem occurs, and that's
That's
what
where the
has to
problem
be
occurs.
what has to be stopped. And I mean, in fairness to Yelp, at least they have been consistent in their position and their effort to keep incentivized reviews off the platform.
Yes, and I agree with them that people who haven't been experienced in business should not be reviewing them. But the fact that they have to put a blanket penalty on the business or a blanket notice on the business and stop taking all reviews is also reflections on Yelp's unsophisticated filtering system.
Yeah.
They should be able to tell who has done business with this business and who hasn't, or who is likely to have done business with this business and who hasn't. And they should be able to filter out individual reviews. And much like their position on filtered reviews, where they typically filter all newbies that are positive, but don't filter newbies that are negative. Again, very unsophisticated filtering, which
Right.
tends to skew reviews negative on
because
Yelp.
negative reviews, I mean, on balance, Yelp's reviews are positive, but the assumption,
Well, they're usually a half or 3/4 of a point lower than any other
than
site
Google.
on
Yeah,
the internet.
that's true.
And it's
But
because they filter out more first-time positive reviews.
well, the operating assumption there is that negative reviews have more credibility than positive reviews, which is
But
which is
it's
which
a
is
flawed
false.
assumption, right?
Yeah.
So this reflects badly on Yelp in several ways. The big one being that they're sanctimonious jerks. The second one being that they obviously have low quality filtering, and I think and so and it doesn't reflect all that well on Alex Friedman either. From where I sit, she is, like I said, doing
Well,
what I call virtue signaling. She really
yeah,
wants to help workers.
it's a
This is
lazy
not the way to do it.
it's lazy, and she thought she
Yes.
was doing a nice thing.
Right.
Oh, I'm having a brain freeze here. I wanted to go out on. Oh yes.
Bright logo.
Okay. Uh,
Oh,
no,
something before Bright logo.
no. What are we going to say about Bright Local?
The conference.
Yeah, yes. No, we were okay. We're all right. Let me say what I'm going to say, and then you can say what you were going to say. So we're gonna be speaking at Bright Local's local SEO for Good, David, Mike, and me, and we'll be talking about some of the user research that we've been doing in different verticals and what we're seeing, and just as a little preview of that, and something that's relevant to this conversation about reviews is that we're seeing a lot more nuanced behavior by vertical and in terms of how people are interacting with the search results than what the conventional wisdom suggests, right? And so, you want to show up for that, because I think it'll be very interesting. And one of the things that we're seeing, just as a little preview, is that people don't really read reviews. Bright Local itself, that does this local review survey annually, talks about how many reviews do you need and minimum scores, and people sort of scrutinizing reviews. And there's this sense that people are reading the most recent reviews and reading a certain threshold of reviews to make a determination about whether to buy from a business. That may be true in certain high consideration cases, but in many cases, people are not reading reviews. They're just
they do look at aggregates and take them very seriously.
They heavily rely on star ratings.
Right.
They are taking those very seriously, and they are using that as a primary decision-making criterion, but they are not doing any in-depth investigation of reviews or trying to assess their veracity or really much about them. Now, in isolated cases, you'll find that people do that. In high consideration cases, YMYL, people will do that kind of thing. But what we're seeing now from hundreds of user testing videos is that people are not really doing any investigation of the reviews beyond looking at the aggregate score, which I think is pretty fascinating. And there are other things like that we'll be talking about.
Right. So just to reemphasize, it's called Local SEO for Good Live. It's August 30th and 31st, and I think it's $25 a ticket. It's 2 days.
Charitable contribution.
Right. And that money is being redistributed to charities of choice of the speakers, and the speakers include Greg Gifford and Joy Hawkins, Amanda Jordan, Ileda Celis, Crystal Carter, Crystal Tang, Andy Simpson, Amy Thompson.
Yeah, it's a great lineup of people in local.
Right. So it should be a good week, and we would encourage you to join us
to show up.
And like Greg said, we will be reviewing some unpublished consumer behavior research.
Exactly. So thanks again for listening. Tell your friends about the Near Memo, and spread the word about the Near Media newsletter coming to you 3 times a week. And we will see you next time.
Thanks for joining David, Mike, and Greg. To stay on top of the latest developments in local, subscribe to our newsletter at nearmedia.co. We'll see you next week.